Now that you have Test Runner Toolkit set up on your machine, we're going to set up some project structure. You don't have to do it exactly this way, but it will help with your configuration files later on if you mirror what we're doing here. The first thing you'll want to do is open your Cypress JSON file. This is used for all Cypress tests, not just tests in the Test Runner Toolkit, where you can set things like global variables, timeouts, and specify things in the project structure. Here, we'll just set a global variable called base URL that your test will use to access the page you're testing against. Next, you'll create a supports directory, and in that directory, you'll create a file called constants.js, a JavaScript file that's going to store our username and password. Open constants.js in your IDE. We're going to create two objects, the first one called locked and the second one called standard. The locked will contain the username and password for a user that demonstrates the locked out behavior, and the standard will be a standard user that can log in normally. Next, you're going to create a directory called page objects. Typically in a test, you separate your logic into two different types of objects. You have page objects and test objects. Page objects typically contain logic that help you interact with the page, doing things like entering a username and password and clicking a button. Test objects contain the logic that check assertions. In other words, they check to see what you expect to happen happens. Next, in your page objects folder, you're going to create a login page class. Within the login class, we're going to use the Cypress get method to locate things from the DOM. First, we want to check to make sure the div that contains all your elements that you're going to use is there. Then you're going to check for the username and password field. You're also going to locate the login button. There's one last method that checks when you enter the wrong password. Do you see the error message? If you enter the web page that you specified in Cypress JSON and take a look at the elements, you'll notice that the get methods we used match up with what you see in the DOM. There's the username and password field, the button that's login. If you enter user information that isn't correct, you'll notice that when you log in, a new element appears, and that element has the metadata, data test, and the value is error, just like in your Cypress get method. The last thing we're going to add to your login page.js page object is a sign-in method. This method will take the username and password that we'll grab from constants.js for user details, enter the username and password in the fields, and then click the login button. We'll call this method later in our test in order to sign in. When you call it in your test, you will pass in login users locked or login users standard from constants.js. The last thing that you'll need to do is export this page object so you can use it in your test. Now that you've finished with your login page object, we're going to create one more page object, and this is for the inventory page in the Swag Labs app. Each page you have should have a separate page object. Therefore, we're going to create a new one in the page objects directory. Once you create your Swag Overview page.js, open it in your IDE. In this page object, we're going to create one simple method called getScreen. This method is going to get from the DOM the class inventory list, which you can see when you go onto the page is the container for all the items on the inventory page. Now that you have your two page objects created, you're ready to start creating test objects in the next lesson.